Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fawcett. Each week we interview experts in AI, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. In our show today, we look at the transformative power of AI in the workplace. I'm joined by Dr. Marie-Helene Pelletier, author of The Resilience Plan, a strategic approach to optimizing your work performance and mental health. MH, thanks for joining us today.
Michael, a pleasure to be here.
I admit I'm really excited about this conversation. I've done a lot of these shows, and we've almost always been focused on here's how you use this thing, or here's what you could do with this thing. But we rarely step back and actually look at the impact of using this thing on employees, people in general, right? So I like I said, I'm excited to dig into that a little bit. But let's just start by doing a quick introduction, and then just tell us a little bit about your work, performance, and mental health.
Yes. So I am a registered psychologist. I combined my training in psychology with training in business early in my career, which actually makes me one of a very few to have both a PhD in psychology and an MBA. Typically not profiles that go together, or you're done with school after a PhD usually.
Yeah, that's a burnout thing, I guess, right?
But I did combine these two, and for me, it worked very well. It happened to just put me exactly on in the area where it felt like the playground was large enough for me to enjoy contributing, both bringing psychology and business together. So I've been in workplace mental health basically for the entirety of my career in different roles, private, public, in leadership roles from very junior to middle manager to chief officer roles. And then in the past 7 years, I have my own business where I do mostly keynote speaking, a lot of executive coaching as well. I still have a small private practice as a psychologist, mostly focusing on workplace related issues.
Cool. Thanks for that. So we're going to talk a bit about generative AI, but I was looking at this study recently that came out from Upwork Research Institute, and it was a global study, and they found that 71% of the full-time employees that they surveyed say they're burned out, and 65% said they were struggling with employer demands on their productivity. And at the same time, 81% of the C-suite answered that they had increased demands on workers around productivity in the past year. It strikes me that, that's been the narrative around generative AI for the last couple of years is, you use this and miraculously you get more productive. But the reality is probably a little different than that. So I was just curious, how can managers balance this? This is a complex problem. Certainly, we want productivity gains, but at the same time, workers' engagement and satisfaction is extremely important to their performance in the business.
Yes, it is a big question, a very important question to ask ourselves, especially if we're in leadership roles. Probably one for all of us in any role to ask ourselves, because we have some agency in changing this. And it's also a question that, yes, connects with AI. And there are other demands, other parts of our work context that are contributing to this, to the sense of challenge from a workload perspective, to the reported rates of burnout. And so, how long do you have for your podcast, Michael? Right? It's a long conversation. And if we narrow it for today, specifically as we're thinking about the role of AI, and the role of AI probably brings a combination of great opportunities and disruptions. And from a psychological human perspective, both the disruptions, but not just that, also the opportunities represent a demand. It's something that will demand our additional thinking, emotions, positive or not so positive, and changes in our behaviors because it changes our overall context. And we'll dive into different ways in which managers can support. Yeah. But even just that, realizing as a manager that whatever happens with AI, the positives and the not so positives, which we will navigate as well, all of this represents additional demand. So it means having conversations with our teams, having conversations on one-on-one, checking in with ourselves and not just assuming that it's there, we need to navigate with it, just add it to the pile. No, it's an additional demand on the list. It needs to be treated as such, and in many ways treated differently from the other demands because it's new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and it seems to me that that some of that stress could easily be related to the fact that you are asking people to do something that isn't in their skill set already. So you're dealing with change, which is always hard, and then also, managing some other sorts of stress that can cause, because there is a lot of narrative around AI and what it's going to have, the impact on workers. So how do business leaders, how do they, how do they talk about this? How do they help their employees, adopt this, be successful? Because certainly, from a business perspective, they need to embrace AI. But at the same time, how do they do that and don't increase, or at least minimize, the increase in stress to their employees?
Um, there are a number of actions to consider. Going back to your comment of a minute ago, it was so important. It connects, yes, with the changes and the demands and all this, but the AI changes are also having an impact on many people's identity as
Mm,
workers. Right? For many people, we derive either a large portion or a moderate or a small portion of our identity from the work we do. It
sure.
connects with meaning, belonging, all these things. And so it has a deeper impact. It's not just, oh, here's an additional tool. It's a tool that means different things about us as human contributors in
Mm,
our work. And so it runs a bit deeper than some of the technological advances we've had before, because
sure.
it does the cognitive things that usually only humans could do, like learning,
Mm,
planning, and all these things.
yeah.
So that's an important piece to note. In terms of what can managers do, here are some examples. Fundamentally, and managers will recognize that some of these are similar to what we did when we started talking about mental health in the workplace. And we're still doing that. The
Mm,
first few things we were doing was increasing training, giving more information. In the absence of information, human brains will assume threat.
mm,
Okay, that's what we do, adaptive, blah, 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 but that's what we'll do. Not so helpful here.
mm,
So we need to add training. And if you're thinking, okay, well, AI is not for right this second in my workplace, I'll do that when we get there. No, let's do it now, proactively, because we will need people to develop that comfort. It doesn't happen instantly. And as we help them develop their comfort, they will have ideas, they will become creative. They will be able to inform how we bring AI to this team here. And we, all of us, including managers for sure, absolutely want this. So now you've increased, that's one action, increase the training. We're bringing in conversations, keynotes, we're reading articles, we're
mm,
going to conferences where this is addressed. We're adding, infusing a lot of this because we will want to keep their expertise and pair it with knowledge in AI.
mm,
But you see how that brings me to the second action I would like to consider is, as managers, make sure you involve your team members in these
mm,
conversations. But if you involve them without training, they won't. It'll be hard to contribute
yeah.
anything in normal. So you increase that access to knowledge sharing, really, and then we involve, right? Another, and there are many, but the third one I would say that you probably want to do concurrently, and you may have started because it relates to other aspects of work productivity, is to invest in that psychological safety. We hear a bit more about these days. It's been around for a while and has been backed up by research and wonderful Dr. Amy Edmondson. But when that psychological safety in a nutshell refers to it, does it feel safe for me to bring an opinion here in this conversation that's completely different from everybody else? Will it be received with respect? And, we may or may not use it, but it's welcomed. Because if we do this, we can address ethical challenges that will come with AI. Right? So
Mm.
that would be my third action to consider for now.
I mean, that's interesting because certainly if and I have a long history of, being involved in implementing technology. And, certainly I would say that anytime you bring in a new system, there's some impact and you need to do some change management. But I guess the part that you don't necessarily think about as much, but it's really important, is this whole narrative around the disruption that AI can cause or may cause in the workplace. So there's a different factor from just here, use this new, sales system or marketing system or whatever, which doesn't necessarily threaten your job or shouldn't anyway, but this could feel a bit more invasive. So I guess that's something I haven't really, articulated that well, but that makes a lot of sense actually.
Yes, and people can use infuse in these conversations, especially if you're a leader, ways to help people in your teams connect their identity evolution in this. So let's say, okay, you're a manager, you're bringing this additional piece of AI, it should increase productivity. You're thinking it's fabulous, it's great, less mistakes, less anything. Wait,
Mhm.
move on. And but if it happens that this particular task was something that this particular individual or team valued, they enjoyed doing it, they
Mhm.
assigned part of their value in the workplace to this thing, then the impact is deeper than just, oh, we're improving
Mm.
productivity, let's have you do something else. To the opposite, you may have some people who see this coming and say, oh, I'm so glad this gets off my plate. I now have more
Mm.
space to create to align my work identity, my ideal work self with what I'm going to do next. So
Mm.
we don't know. We don't want to assume. That's the key thing.
Yeah.
And we want to hear. Let's talk. Because if it is not that aligned with what they were hoping would happen next, and it still needs to happen, for
Mm.
example, let's talk about in which other ways we can make now your available time even more aligned. Let's be
Mm.
creative with your ideal work self. And these come from conversations. AI cannot solve this. We as
Mm.
leaders need to have these conversations.
Sure. Well, and it sounds like too that if I'm an employee and I have some input into this, I'm going to feel more empowered because you have at least listened to me. You may not do what I suggest, but at least I feel like I have a voice. Um, the other thing I was thinking too, in an implementation like normal tech kind of rollout, you would include a bit of opportunity to learn from somebody who's more of an advocate or an expert for the technology. And I suspect that, and I've seen this over and over again in businesses I talk to, that they have a lot of people using AI that they don't necessarily even know are using AI, right? And not that in a bad way, but just like, oh, this helps me do this thing I do, and so I've been using this for a while. It's not sanctioned by the company, but those people could be really beneficial in this whole adoption process by being more of an advocate that's a peer that could help them understand the tool and how it can help them maybe.
Very true. And
Mm.
it is sometimes through these trainings that
Mm.
individuals and teams will realize, oh, AI is already here. And here are the ways in which we've been
Mm.
using it. And making this realization more conscious allows them to realize, to deepen their experience, understand
Mm.
it better. And we will all benefit from this because it will keep going, hence the continuous learning situation we're officially in now.
Yeah.
And we can use this. And individuals, we want to use those that find themselves in that champion role in some ways. We also want to listen to those that have concerns because it's almost like everyone will have strengths and blind spots. If we're
Mhm.
champion early adopters, that's great. Let's make sure we look for risks. If we are those that are focusing on risks and on problems, let's make sure we also see the opportunities. So it's for all of us, this new context encourages us to broaden even more our overall perspective.
Mhm. Well, one of the things we talk about a lot is around employee engagement, and I spend a lot of my time looking at customers and customer experience, but I think there's and have always thought, and this has kind of been a big argument in the CX folks, like does the employee experience matter in the CX process or delivery, right? And I personally think that that's an absolutely critical piece, right? If I have upset employees providing customer service, they're just not going to do as good a job, right? So engagement's important, I guess is my point. So how can they, how do we encourage this or maintain a higher level of engagement when we're going through these projects and leading to these changes?
Yes. Some of the things we've already mentioned. We want the training. We want to create, because we're saying, oh, we want to talk and listen to people's perspective and all this. If we keep it just vague like this,
Mm,
we're busy all day, every day. This opportunity is not going to come up. Especially we as leaders need to make this part of our structures. Maybe it's part of the regular meeting we have.
mm,
How are we doing with AI? How are we assessing how AI is this still now good for us? It was good last week. It may not be good this week. We
mm,
need to change it. The pace of change is going faster. So
yeah.
maybe it's formal structures. Every 3 months for sure, we're having a half-day conversation on the various
Mm,
AI supports we have here. Maybe we're creating an ethics committee to look only at the
mm,
ethical aspects of the ways in which we bring AI in this workplace.
mm,
So creating those formal structures, creating structures where we're also paying attention to the humans. We know from research that as we interact a bit more with AI, which at times has this quasi human feel to it, it's
mm,
still not a human. We're still human. We still need human connections with
mm,
humans. So there is attachment theories and all these that inform that research.
mm,
So maybe we need to create structures. When are we having social interactions in person? It could be virtual as well, but creating these structures as well.
mm,
How are we ensuring that we do recognition of the human contributions? Sometimes it's a given. We're leaders and we think, of course, yes, if someone does something fantastic, I will say it because that's part of my values. Great.
mm,
When's the last time you did it? Oh, right. So we
mm.
need to create a structure.
I mean, it sounds like some of what you just said is just be intentional about this process, that you want to have everything out in the open. It's not like the old days when IT handed you something and said, "Here's your new system. Go use it." It has to be this communication chain and change management process. But to go directly to kind of one of the big issues, I think it's this idea that there's this perception, at least, that AI is coming for your job, or at least for some jobs, right? It's going to displace some workers, and unfortunately, I may think you have this perception, and it's not right. But to you, if it is in fact something you hold, it is reality to you, right? I mean, you have to acknowledge that my perceptions are in fact a part of the way I look at this. So how do how do you deal with that from a manager leader perspective? How do you help them navigate the potential? And I mean, let's be honest, that some jobs will be displaced in this process at some point. So how do we help them navigate those job and career changes in a way that puts that perception at ease and helps with their engagement level?
It is, in fact, you're right, a big question. I would say first, as managers, we probably have even more of a responsibility, a requirement to learn more about AI. So everyone will benefit from learning more.
Mm,
As leaders, we will want to combine our expertise, our knowledge of the particular industry we're in with, we don't need to become experts in AI. We don't have time anyway, but we want probably a bit more. We need to understand a bit, how does this tool help us exactly? Is it based on this just extremely advanced way of doing statistics potentially? I don't know, but we
mm,
need to get this a little bit so that we can contribute to it and find our footing, be
mm,
able to be that leader, that maestro that orchestrates our humans supported by AI, as opposed to, oh, the steering wheel is turning itself without me, right? So as managers, that's a key thing. If you
yeah.
don't do this, it'll be very hard to support others. So it is a good, very important next action to consider.
Mm,
In terms of people in our teams, you're right. We actually know from recent surveys that some individuals, yes, will be just plain worried about AI.
Yeah.
And being worried about AI, I've seen in some surveys, is actually can be connected to be worried about other things,
Mm,
just lower levels of mental health in your workplace, for example. So that subjective sense of how I'm feeling about AI is leading to other perceptions, broader ones. So
mm,
it is very important to pay attention to this. And first, I would say we want to make sure we're listening, because sometimes as leaders, we'll have that positive perspective. Not everyone shares it.
mm.
It's not about trying to overlay our positive mindset over our team. We
Yeah.
do want to model it, and we want to listen to their concerns. We probably want to move the conversation from the big picture to the granular. So we're not so much talking about jobs, we're talking about tasks. It may be that it will be all the tasks, but it is unlikely all the tasks all at the same time. If that's the case, we can talk about it as well. But for most people, this is where the current research, 2024 publications, is
Mm,
pointing. Let's look at the tasks instead. And so that way, number one, it's more realistic. Most workplaces will start with replacing aspects of tasks that are,
mm,
say, very detailed oriented or requiring lots of data management. And we can start there. Then having conversations about what may be enhancement.
mm,
So it's still there, it's enhanced, it's different, it's optimizing this part, and we still need your human brain for this part. So it's having these conversations in the granular. Let's move from the big picture worry overall. Let's dive into the specifics for you, for us, in this team, in this organization, this task. And then
mm.
it's easier to tackle the next steps one thing at a time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So a few years ago, I read this book by Patty McCord, who was the head of HR for Reid Hoffman as they launched Netflix, and one of the things that she said in there that I've used this a few times since, and I think this is is really important, is that you're hired for specific things, and you know what those are, and you have had this conversation, but as a company grows, scales, those things can change, and it might be that you don't feel comfortable with the level of how big the thing's gotten, or what demands are put on you because of that, or whatever, right? But in her estimation, it was the way they dealt with it, and I think this is was really appropriate, was they simply said, okay, we know that we'll have these conversations, and we want you to know that we're dedicated to helping you through any changes that come up, but at the same time, sometimes you won't be the fit for the role that you're in the next iteration of the company. So, you have to face realities, but at the same time, you have to know that the company is embracing that and is going to try to help you through that change. I mean, does that make sense? I mean, how does that apply to what we're talking about?
Absolutely applies. It's a great example. I mean, if you even think of the
Mm,
pandemic has, with its various changes, has made some job fits evolve.
right.
Some jobs that were not such a great fit became a better fit, and
Mm,
some jobs that were a great fit became not such a great fit.
yeah.
And so, big changes in the context, whether it's AI, pandemic, or something else, or growth of the organization, will lead to next adjustments. So yes, it is part of what what will be part of that situation.
Yeah, it's almost a cultural shift, really, for the company. How do I as an individual know that I'm valued, but at the same time, I may or may not continue to be the fit for this role, but I know I have a path, right? I mean, so I don't feel I'm not as scared of change if I know I have a path.
That's right. And
Mm,
the more we have conversations, the more we infuse, yeah, the people side of things, the business side of things, the technology side of things, the more we all need to think about this. Because, say, for example, as an organization, we have the opportunity to bring an AI particular piece that will be a very allowing us to do certain things better, faster, all these things. We may want to think about this for a moment. If we bring all the AI support we can, and that improves our productivity by a factor of 1.7, let's say. And that means we're needing to then decrease the team by a certain number of people. If instead increasing our productivity for 1.55 as opposed to
Mhm.
1.7 allows us to keep a larger portion of humans, which we may need down the
Mm,
road, that may be something to consider. We don't want to jump too fast to,
mhm.
oh, this is a clear, we've never done this, looking at only one variable in this equation when we're evolving, when we're
Yeah.
considering launching a new product or new service. There's usually a number of considerations to be taken.
Mm,
Same here. And that's an important perspective to keep in mind as managers. Decisions about AI don't reside only, say, with the technology team. The technology team is there, and you here as leader retain all the decisions, all the responsibilities, all the thinking you've had to do about other things as well. And you
mm,
have to make sure you see it this way, because this is not about waiting for one department to provide their update and then we go for this. It's one department provide this update, and we need to consider all the variables in this equation.
mm. I mean, that really comes into the next question I was gonna go to and ask about is about strategy, for addressing this disconnect. And so that sounds like that's a part of the way to help with the disconnect between executives and employees when they're talking about these projects. But are there other best strategies that executives could use when they're kind of planning out how they're going to do this and what they should do with their employees?
I would say, yes, you want to have a strategy, and the
Mm,
strategy, just like any other strategy, will usually have, say, a direction. Let's say initially it might be increasing comfort with increased density of AI, for example, and
mm,
then having different strategic pillars, usually about three. So we'll have our strategy, we'll have our pillars, we'll have our actions,
mm,
and implement. So that may involve some of what we've talked about today. But
right.
then, just like any other strategy, in 3 months, we'll review
Mm,
it and evolve it. So we may find that in 3 months from now, we've now implemented all the training, having conversations, involving people in the committees. We've done this. Now, maybe we're looking at actually implementing. So maybe we now have a strategic pillar that's focused on managing the density of AI at any given point. If we have
mm,
5 things to implement in the next 6 months, maybe we're doing once a month as opposed to all 5 this month and let's rip off the band-aid. No,
yeah,
that never
yeah.
been a great idea. And
No.
but it is something to make sure we pay attention to, because it
Yeah,
could be tempting otherwise.
yeah.
So it is about planning your strategy each time and evolving it. And some elements of the first iteration of the strategy may remain in the next iteration. For
Mm,
example, maintaining two-way communication, because things will change so much that we will need to talk and listen on a regular basis. That is what will allow us to stay agile
mm.
with the size and pace of changes.
Sure. So it's really about the two sides of this, right? Address the opportunity, address the challenge, and then refine that from the data. So you're collecting feedback on an ongoing way, and then you can refine your strategy to adjust to whatever those impact those changes are having on your workforce. Then.
It is. And through that, you'll see also many connections with whatever efforts you're doing as a leader and probably in collaboration with your HR on the overall mental health strategy of your
Mm,
organization here. Likely, it involves some elements of increasing psychological safety. Elements of increasing psychological safety for the purpose of better workplace mental health
mm,
will also be valid for us here. So,
sure.
as we're increasing, I'll take another example, growth and development. We know it is a factor that will increase overall mental health in the workplace. Great.
Mm,
Here, in the context of AI, in increasing our resilience as we bring AI more in the workplace, that may be another action we make sure it's part of our strategy at some point as leaders, where
mm,
we're even more paying attention to how we are supporting growth and development. How, because it connects, right, so much with,
mm,
okay, my identity is in part connected to my role is changing. How do I grow? Sometimes it will be a growth to help with the enhanced part of my role here.
Sure.
Or it may be growth somewhere else, not the right fit anymore. We could see it coming in 6 months or in 2 years. Okay. In which ways can we help me grow for this period of time, which will
Mhm.
allow you as a manager to keep me and contributing for those 2 years? Because in part, you've nourished my need for growth. And I'm learning other things. We're setting me up for my next step, even if it's not here. It may be here somewhere else in the organization, maybe somewhere else. But you've retained me. You've retained me in an engaged way in a phase where you needed, this particular individual.
Sure. Yeah, that's good. So you're balancing that here's the path, but here's the immediacy of what we're trying to do, and yet I still see that I'm valued and I have a choice along the way that I wouldn't. Yeah. So that really brings me to this idea about anxiety and the employee and back to that survey. I mean, you can see that there's a great deal of stress that's starting to come out from different employees about the increasing presence of AI. So, if you were talking to the employees, not the managers, what advice would you give them? How do they deal with their anxiety as they see this happening to them and in their job, in their business?
Yes. Anxiety in general about anything, even broader than, say, just AI or even just the workplace, often tends to be, if we want to simplify it in a way, but it will connect with most people, it's us thinking about a catastrophic type of scenario
Mhm.
and assuming that it is highly likely to happen. So we're predicting a catastrophe and we're telling ourselves, this is exactly what's going to happen. Well, of
Mhm.
course, now we're generated a threat. Just saying it, I think, probably makes me more anxious. So, what we want to make sure is counter this. Number one, how likely is this scenario? What are other possible scenarios?
Mm.
And then the actual probability of it. Is this a possibility? Yes, it is. Is it a high probability? We don't know. So,
Mm.
do we want to prepare? Yes, we do. And one of the ways in general to deal with anxiety about anything, you and I, let's say we're afraid of jumping in the water. Well, the best way to deal with this will be gradual exposure. We're going
Mm.
to first sit on the side of the pool, put just our feet in the water. Then we may move the feet in the water. Then we may want to go jump in the area that's very, very shallow, but we're jumping in it. And then we're gradually, right? So,
Sure.
same thing here. We want gradual exposure, which does bring us back to that
Mm.
getting information. So, you're reading the newspaper. You tend to read your usual things. There is an article about AI. You don't read it, change that. Go read
Mm.
that article. You're going to an event. There are all of these other presentations that are very related to your technical expertise,
Mhm.
and you're interested and you want to see this speaker, and that's great. There is a talk about AI. Let go and go to that one. It
Mhm.
does require us changing our ways, right?
Yeah.
But as individuals, we have that agency. And the reality is that there will be changes all the time. Some we can predict, some we cannot predict. AI is one, and it's here. So
Mm.
therefore, let's push ourselves to get that
Sure.
information.
Well, and it sounds like that you're saying too that if that knowledge, we used to say knowledge is power, and then with the internet we changed that, right? But for a personal approach, when it comes to anxiety, knowledge is power, right? I mean, if the more I can learn, the more I can help put down those fears that aren't true or that I didn't know weren't true, but now I've proven that or whatever, right? So, yeah, that makes sense.
And or the fear, the possibility is there. You just change
Right.
how much probability you assign to it. And therefore it stays on the radar. We are not now moving you to 100% excited and happy positive, but we've broadened the perspective. So the concerns may still be there,
Mhm.
but we've made the overall perspective more realistic.
Mm.
And yes, in this case, with more information, you do have more agency, because now next time you are having this conversation with your boss or your colleague, your child, someone, you will have ideas
Yeah.
because you've infused more information about this overall context. And that in
Mm.
itself will give you ideas of things to try, things to
Mm.
consider, experiment with. And now we're in what we call active coping. So you're taking actions to
Right.
deal with the challenge in front of you, which we know from research. We've known from research for years actually puts us in a much better place.
Sure. Well, I mean that's it's just that ability then to deal with that anxiety in an incremental way as I learn more. But I suspect that also really puts you in a different light with the employer too, right? I mean, if you're an employee that has been open to learning and is active in this, my perception of you as an employer would be much higher in your adaptability and ability to stay engaged, right?
It's possible. I mean, it's hard to tell sometimes even where the
Mm,
workplace will be, because it also depends. Yeah, there will be some work cultures that may think this way, some work cultures that may not.
mm, it's
But
fair.
I think, regardless from our perspectives as individuals, from a psychological perspective, it does put us in a much healthier place, a much more grounded, solid, actively engaged place. Now, you're right. For some employers, it will actually um, you'll be better able to contribute to conversations,
Mhm,
really. And the reality is that pre AI and other types of supports, there were some personality traits that employers might have been looking for even more, like that attention to detail and ability to
mhm,
focus on very repetitive tasks without
sure.
errors and these kinds of things. With AI being able to help us with this, we will need to look at other parts of our personalities. We don't have just one trait. Even if you're like this, you're other things as well. And
Sure.
so, how can we nourish these other parts to bring your best to this team or other teams?
Yeah. Yeah, that's logical, and you're right. I mean, the culture certainly has an impact on that perception as well. So, yeah. Well, let's shift to your book for a minute because I one of the things that I got out of it that I think is really interesting, and I hadn't used this term in this way, but was this idea of the trait of resilience and how it has this role in helping professionals, leaders reduce burnout and be healthier, live a healthier life. Can you can you talk a little bit about this idea of building a resilience plan and how would you do that and then how could that what impact would that have on your performance and mental health?
Yeah, huge, huge. And i- in an overall business perspective, we talk about financial resilience, we talk about resilience of systems, of operations. It is always about preparing in a proactive way so we can go through challenges to whatever the thing is, the system or the finances, such that we can recover and ideally grow from it and learn. Same thing here. What I was finding with people I was working with was that people knew the kinds of things that would increase our overall resilience as humans, especially after pandemic. We had heard about
Mm,
cardio training, strength training, meditation, various other pieces that I do bring back in the book because they are backed up by research. The challenge is not about knowing, it's about implementing. And that's where I came with this perspective in the book about you need to be strategic about your resilience. You need to create a plan because, in the absence of a plan, and given how busy we are, personal life, work life,
mm,
nothing's going to happen. We'll just be reactively
yeah,
navigating with whatever is there. That's it, without much agency, which really,
mm,
same to as any other situations where we create plans at work. If we actually create a plan here, which does not take a lot of time, it is a concise book. The exercises are very straightforward. And
mm,
in fact, we'll send you, Michael, links to worksheets that are free.
great.
So you don't even have to have the book. You can do the work with the worksheets. They're simple, they're straightforward. I know the one that I work with has a lot of time, but this just, I've distilled which tools can we use from strategy in business
Mm.
to create our strategic plan on our resilience so that you can, so to speak, increase your baseline as you go through many changes and demands like AI.
Sure. Well, so that's excuse me, that's all the time we have today. But really interesting conversation, and I definitely learned a lot, and I like this idea about how to use resilience as as a way to manage some of these difficulties, right? So obviously, read the book, That'd be great. You've got some free resources that we're going to put in the show notes that that folks can check out. But also, one thing I always like to ask at the end: could you recommend somebody, a thought leader, an author, somebody that you think the audience would get benefit from, that could help with this topic or others? Right?
Yes. So with this topic, I'm going to go with David De Kramer. So Decremer. He has a couple of books related to AI. His most recent, The AI Savvy Leader, I would say is an excellent resource. So I would recommend that book.
Great. I'll put that in the show notes as well. So thank you,
Sure.
and Image, thank you so much for joining today. A really valuable conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining. Remember to hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform to help others find the show. For more on AI and other software research reports, briefs, and blog posts, check out arionresearch.com. If you have AI, generative AI, or business automation expertise, either as a provider or as an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arionresearch.com, and we'll see if we can get you on as a guest. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arion Research production. I'm Michael Fawcett, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.